Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I'm thrilled today to have a conversation with Francesco Federico, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of S&P Global. Welcome, Francesco.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me.
Absolutely. I wondered if we could kick off this conversation with you telling us a little bit more about S&P Global, because many of us are familiar with S&P 500. We know S&P Global, the name, but we don't necessarily know that much about the organization.
Yes, of course. Well, happy to share a little bit more about S&P. So S&P Global is a sort of financial services company that really brings together data, intelligence, expertise, and benchmarks for the financial and energy markets. As you said, we are sort of very well known for our ratings divisions that obviously, as the name suggests, provides credit ratings and other ratings related services. We also have a division that focuses on indices, and obviously you touched on the S&P 500, which are sort of widely used across the industry. And then we have two very important divisions as well, market intelligence and energy, which are sort of data providers for the financial and energy sectors, respectively.
Great. So, in your role as Chief Marketing Officer, tell me about maybe you can even tell us in context of the people that are on your team and sort of like what their responsibilities are within the organization, how you oversee that team.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I would say it's an incredible privilege. I mean, being the chief marketing officer of a 160 years old company with so much heritage. I mean, it all started, with Barumpur, again, 160 something years ago, and then it really grew by acquisition over the years into becoming this sort of heritage brand, really. In the financial services, and so the way we are structured is, I would say, probably very similar to many business-to-business brands in that we have a very strong and talented in-house brand and creative team. So we really operate with a bit of a hybrid mindset when it comes to creative ideation and operations with in-house talent as well as a network of trusted partner agencies. We then have a strategy and demand generation team that really focused on all things from account-based marketing to marketing technology, data science, of course, AI and AI operations, which are now huge. And then we do have a strong focus on what we call portfolio marketing, which essentially is sort of building narratives for our solutions that are sort of collection of products and services coming from across all the enterprise, really targeting sort of individual personas and accounts based on their particular issues. And so within portfolio marketing, as you might imagine, you find campaign, you find content, you find event marketing, and so on. And then, of course, we have our divisional marketing teams, which are very much focused on the sort of day-to-day demand generation, the event production, et cetera, et cetera.
Excellent. So, you've had an interesting career path. We talked about a little bit during our prep conversation that I think you were born in Milan and originally from Milan, and then made the big decision to go to law school after college. So tell us about your career path that led to S&P.
Yeah, indeed. It's certainly unconventional and I would say scary at times. Although now that sort of I look back at it, I would say that it all made sense. I can really see how now everything fell into the right places. So yes, as you said, I'm Italian, born and bred in Milan, where I studied law at uni because that sort of was my childhood dream to become a lawyer. But then I also had another passion. I mean, my father is an engineer. He put me in front of I remember IBM PS2 when I was 6 years old. And so I sort of grew up with technology in the house, really experimenting with tech at an early age. And so I also started a very small e-commerce business on the side while I was studying law at uni. And that quickly grew to sort of really become like a small sort of one-man show kind of digital marketing agency, and I then decided to sort of really lean into that career of innovation and marketing, because I think, although I really loved like all the sort of rhetoric and the sort of debate that really comes with the law profession, I really loved it. I was so much drawn into innovation, and I mean, the law profession is not necessarily sort of the most fast-moving and innovative industry. I would say for a reason, by design,
Yeah.
it has to be predictable. And so I did finish my studies, and interestingly, I actually graduated with a thesis on artificial intelligence, which back then mostly meant expert system, but it was a thesis exploring the role of expert systems applied to law practice. That was quite fun. And then since then, I've been in marketing. So I spent a good chunk of my career in digital marketing specifically, because, as I said, I really started with my own agency, doing a little bit of everything from SEO, SEM. Back then, there were still webmasters, so we could do a little bit of everything. And then in 2009, I joined Vodafone Italy. And since then, I've been with sort of large organizations. So I spent time with Vodafone. Then I moved on in consumer electronics with Acer. And in 2016, I then sort of pivoted to business marketing when I joined JLL, so commercial real estate and professional services. And then in 2023, I landed at S&P Global.
Wow. That's quite a path, and I think you early in your career when you thought you were going to be an attorney, you probably couldn't have envisioned being a CMO of a company like S&P Global.
Yeah, it was quite a journey, but I have to say that what really attracts me about marketing as a discipline is this intersection of creativity and almost like an artistry to it that reminds me of my sort of humanities studies, but at the same time, you also do have, especially in digital marketing, that grounding on data and on rigor, which again draws and brings me back to my law studies, because there is almost a rigor in the way we go about doing marketing, since obviously internet became such a prevailing force in demand generation and brand. And so that goes back to my point around sort of connecting the dots. It's a journey that sort of looking back really makes sense. And the other thing I would say I really love about marketing is the ability to really work and see very different industries. It's no coincidence that I sort of went sort of spent time in fairly different industries. I never was
Hmm.
sort of left telco for telco or consumer electronics for consumer electronics. I always wanted to sort of learn about a new industry, and this is another thing I really love about marketing. And again, bringing together what has worked. In I don't know, consumer electronics, like when we did real-time predicting pricing at Acer, and then bring it in real estate. It was like sort of very unusual sort of, but it worked. And so that's another thing I really love about the discipline.
I love that. Well, so I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that you wish that you'd gotten early in your career, or maybe this is advice you would dispense to a young person who's just starting out, early in a marketing career.
Well, certainly, I would say never sort of underestimate the power of network and networking with empathy. I would say that is
Hmm.
the additional bit recommendation, because I'm an introvert. I'm quite shy, an introvert by nature, and so as you can imagine, sort of growing up through the ranks, I didn't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on networking, with purpose, networking with empathy, because that's not just who I am. I tend to be sort
Hmm.
of I enjoy sort of being with myself, with my close friends. And I actually realized later, especially as you start climbing into sort of roles of increasing responsibility and you're managing larger teams, really networking, not just, for your own benefit and for your own career, but really networking with your team, spending quality time with
Yeah.
your team, with your peers, is incredibly important. And so this is maybe a piece of advice to those that sort of like me tend to be more on the shy side, to really make it intentional to go out there and reach out to people, but obviously without never losing authenticity. Always, do not force yourself. Find a way that makes it sort of bearable, in a way where you're not spending too much energy, too much emotional energy. but it will be much really appreciated. And one way, for example, I go about it is to be very transparent. Every time I sort of start managing a team or I change groups, I always say out loud, this is who I am. You know, I tend to be quite shy, so it's not like I'm by myself because I don't want to talk to you. It's just because that's who I am. But please reach out. Please sort of drop by my desk. I'm always available, and I always make an effort, for example, to walk the floor when I'm visiting offices. So small things, but really
Mhm.
trying to make an authentic effort to reach out. That would be the one thing I wish someone had sort of forced me to do early on in my career.
Well, I will give a plug to my own book that came out in January here, The Connector's Compass. The subtitle is Navigate Your Way to Meaningful Relationships, because
Yes.
it's not a networking book. It's a book about how networking is a way to meet a person. And then once you
Yes.
meet that person, how do you nurture that relationship and grow that relationship? So introverts can learn from that, extroverts can learn from that, but I felt, compelled that it's kind of my life's mission to unlock the power of human connection. So I believe everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what you feel your superpower is.
Uh, Well, I think it's this ability of connecting the dots we touched on earlier. I think sort of seeing things. I'm a very curious person, and I tend to try to get to know as many things as humanly possible, even in disciplines and areas that are not necessarily connected with my daily work. And that really helps with connecting the dots. And I think there is one particular area that I believe has now become, if you want, a superpower. Maybe it wasn't until a while ago, but I mean, being always so drawn into technology and having spent so much time in marketing technology and digital marketing before landing into fully integrated sort of CMO roles really gave me this ability to leverage technology to its fullest potential, stay away from hypes, and really be very, very commercially minded. And also being a little bit of a nerd myself, you know, I like to play with a little bit of coding, and that really helps me connect with my technology counterparts and technology colleagues. Obviously, not speaking as equal because they are the experts and sort of
Right.
they know so much more than I do. But it allows me, in a similar way to when I talk to my legal colleagues, to somehow speak the same language. You know, because I did try things on the side. I do know some of the inner workings of these capabilities, and that I think is something that really helped me. So it's really this connecting the dots across very different and distant disciplines that I think has really helped me throughout my career and my life in general. I think in sort of seeing patterns.
Awesome. I love that. I'm curious if there are some specific values that you either want to demonstrate as a leader, or maybe these are values you would demand for people that are on your team.
Well, I think for sure integrity is the number one. I think that's I mean, it's first of all, it's because it's the right thing to do. I mean, integrity, you know, being a trustworthy, accountable person that sort of lives through work day to day with integrity. I think it's the moral thing to do, but also I think it's the convenient thing to do, especially at a time of hyper transparency like the ones we live in today. You know, with social media now, we even accelerate even further accelerated with AI. If you're not grounded into sort of values of trust, integrity, it's consumers will see through it. You know, they will find you out. And so I always say to the team, you know, yes, of course we want to move fast. I always push, you know, especially now with AI, you know, test and test, but always with integrity. Always make sure you sort of remind yourself, you know, the brand we're in, you know, the responsibility we have to our shareholders, stakeholders, clients. We need to protect our data. We need to protect our estate. We need to protect the value that we have built over the so many years. And so there is always that balance between, yes, pushing the envelope, less, yes, obviously it's a competitive field, but at the same time, always grounded in sort of integrity and sort of being compliant with our own rules.
That makes sense. So here at Setup, we're marketing matchmakers, and we that means we connect brands with agencies that can often fill in gaps. And sometimes the gaps are capacity gaps. You don't have enough arms and legs to do the work. Sometimes they're capability gaps. We're good at these 10 things, but there are these other two or three things that we're not experts on. And so we live in the space between brands and agencies. We're not on the agency side and we're not on the client side. So we have a unique perspective on that relationship between the two. I'm just curious, generally, how do you like to work with agencies?
Well, I think agencies are super important. It's really the lifeblood of a marketing department. I mean, there is always this incredible value coming from the agencies in terms of new experimentation, new trends, creativity. And so for me, it has always been like a balancing act in what I call this hybrid approach, where we build really strong COEs, strong capabilities at the center in-house, but then we also build a very flexible muscle, sort of a panel of agencies that we know, we trust. Back to my point around integrity, we really want to have people that can come along the journey with us for a while. So we're never transactional in our engagements with agencies. We always want to build like a long relationship. We want them to start to really get to know us deeply, our ethos, who we are as a company. And I think the general rule of thumb is if there is something that if it went wrong, it would land on the CEO desk, then probably I want that skill set, that capability to stay in-house.
Mm, makes
Whereas
sense.
if it is something really highly specialized or something that has to scale up and down fairly quickly to adapt to cyclical demand, etc., then it's where maybe agencies can really help. And then obviously there is the wild card, and that is when like you have huge campaign coming in, there is a great desire internally, big ambition, to come up with a fresh new idea. And again, that's where maybe you want to draw from the freshness of someone coming in
Mm.
with fresh eyes, rather than relying on incredible colleagues that are in house, but maybe too much used to the way we do things. And so that's also obviously an area and a use case where we would seek agency support.
Yeah, I was to add to that, are there certain areas where you generally feel like this discipline of marketing should stay in-house because it's core to our business? And are there certain other disciplines where you say, I really don't ever foresee a time when we keep that in-house because we want that fresh perspective or outside expertise?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few, like, for example, brand. I think it's one that should squarely sitting in-house with, again, a
Hmm.
panel of agencies helping with execution, but the brand knowledge, not only should sit in-house, but should sit in-house with people that have been with the company for a while. I really want people that have lived through waves of change. And actually, when I stepped into this role, I was very lucky to find an incredibly talented team that has been really through many cycles of change, and that is incredibly valuable. And that's really so almost like the custodians of the brand. So it's not just obviously the brand vertical and functional expertise, but it's also the custodianship of the brand. I also think especially now, this is maybe a passing phase, but I think when I think about AI discoverability showing up on conversational search, this is an emerging field, and that's where I really want to build in-house knowledge. I think there will be a time when maybe geo will become very much like search engine optimization, like a little bit more of a commodity that gets more sort of maybe externalized or treated more as a day-to-day BAU thing, but that's not the case today. We have a plethora of conversational interfaces out there in the markets, and the way sources are cited, they are completely different from one another. Some brands show up, others don't show up at all, and this is just between the top four conversational search engines. And so I think that's a capability I would really love to build in-house. When we think about media buying, for example, that's another area where I think sits squarely outside of the company, something that you can have easily with an agency. And then, as I said, you have things like conversational search, demand generation, account-based marketing is another example where I feel should sit in-house, but I'm not that sort of. I mean, I'm open to other solutions. Where maybe
Hmm.
in another company you might have more flexibility and an agency helping with that. So I think there is this big gray area in the middle where, depending on who you are as a business,
Oh
it
yeah.
shifts. But then brand on one side and media buying on the other, I think sits squarely in-house and on agency respectively.
Yeah. Well, we've published over 100, I think 115 CMO spotlights, and the answer to that question has been wildly different over the 115 or so
Yes.
interviews because it depends a lot on how is your core team structured and what is their expertise, and then where do you need to augment the internal team. So some companies have very small internal teams and lean very heavily on agency support, and some have very robust marketing teams and just don't need that much external support. And both models are good. It just depends on your team and your company. So, Francesco, I know that we work with a lot of different functions within the organization. And so I'm curious, how do you demonstrate the value of marketing to the
Mm.
non-marketing functions within our organization?
I think the honest answer is it's a mix. So I think that the first is probably a little bit expected, and that is really showing commercial impact. I think this is particularly true in B2B, maybe less so in B2C. I remember in B2C there was also an element of high recognition of the value of brand work and sort of big splash
Yeah.
campaigns that were necessarily connected to immediate revenue. In B2B, I think because of the heavy reliance on digital marketing and events, there is an expectation for marketing to really drive revenue, which I think is very reasonable. And so that's, for me, is almost BAU. So I always say, let's build the data capability that enables us to track everything. Let's not just look at directly generated revenue, but also influenced revenue, which I think is a great way to measure also the more subtle signals, especially useful in long cycle businesses where between generating a lead and closing a deal might take 18 months. You also want to capture those more subtle signals and define a methodology around influenced revenue. But I think the other way goes back to the emotional side of marketing, and that is really understanding what ticks when it comes to the leadership team. What do they really care about?
Mm.
Is it recognition? Is it pride for working for, to work for a particular brand? And I think marketing can really play a big role in sort of deploying initiatives that might seem at first instance tactical, but actually allow us to change the mind and change the perception of what marketing can do in the eyes of senior decision makers. And so
Hmm.
sometimes even a very sort of, I don't know, a quick fire guerrilla campaign on social media, or maybe adverts in airports, or a quick flight on TV might not really move the needle from a revenue standpoint. But if they really address what is perceived to be a very high stakes need from senior leadership, that's what we do to establish the value of marketing, and that then unlocks the possibility, unlocks the budget, unlocks the freedom, most importantly, for us to then do the things that really impact end to end the bottom line. So I think it's a mix of the usual attribution answer with also being smart in really showcasing the wider gamut of value, and that's the answer to this can only be tailored to each individual company. You really need, as a CMO, to understand what makes your peers in the C-suite tick, and obviously the CEO, and show value to them in that way.
Hmm. I appreciate something that you said. I'll extract out of there is looking at the leadership team within your company as a constituent group and as an
Oh yeah,
audience that you also want to influence and help them be armed with the right information that helps them feel successful. Um,
absolutely.
so I'm curious if there's a specific program or campaign that you ran either at S&P Global or maybe in a previous life that taught you something valuable, either because it was a flop and you learned a really important lesson, or because it was a huge success and it's something maybe you'd like to emulate again in the future.
Well, I can certainly share that was like a flop that then actually became a great learning opportunity. And that was when I transitioned from consumer marketing to business marketing. It was a time where I was sort of just off the back of a very successful implementation of predictive real-time pricing, which we did back at Ace on an e-commerce website that enjoyed, tens of millions of unique visitors every month. And then, so as you can imagine, use lots of regression models and statistics. We were able to, in real time, adjust the price sort of to maximize conversion and minimize sort of acquisition cost. It was a great success. And so then I joined the B2B, JLL particularly. And obviously, I wanted to run fast with account-based marketing. And I think what I did wrong back then was the fact that I underestimated the luxury that in consumer marketing we do have as marketers, and that is the huge denominator. So you have these huge pools of clients, and you can run all sorts of analysis because there are so many. And so it's so, I wouldn't say easy, but certainly it's much faster to get to a good sort of good models that are statistically relevant, significant and relevant, and they can actually turn results. That was not the case in B2B. I mean, I remember in commercial real estate, in the capital markets audience, we literally had an audience of like 4,000 individuals across the whole of EMEA. And so to really try to in real time, optimize for such a small audience, that wasn't really going to work. And then so we pivoted from that and we said, okay, maybe this is a case where it's not necessarily something we do in real time data led, but it's something that we curate through a content hub experience based on personas or based on accounts. And so I think that was a nice experience because it highlighted that when you really work with high value cohorts, there might be ROI in not automating everything and actually curating experiences. And I think that sort of experience translated well now here at S&P, where we launched more than a year ago now the Chief Client Office, which again is a sort of super high touch, white gloves way of engaging with our top clients and delivering to them sort of the best the S&P has to offer. And that experience taught me an important lesson, which I'm now carrying over here at S&P, where yes, we're using data because we have a huge amount of clients and data points for our longer tail, and we're doing a lot of automation and AI-based personalization and content distribution. But at the same time, for our top CCO accounts, really the sort of la creme of a creme, the very best, we're still very much white gloves. We are creating content experiences that are unique to them because the ROI is there, because it really makes a difference for these clients to feel like we have created something bespoke for them, maybe a newsletter campaign or a content hub on the website or an exclusive event that really makes the difference. And so that was a very interesting takeaway from my days between Acer and JLL.
Very cool. Okay, these are for fun, just to wrap things up, rapid fire. So the first, is there a quote or a book or a movie or a sports team or a band that really inspires you? And what is it about that thing that inspires you the most?
Well, I am a huge fan of classical music, and in particular, I do love composer Beethoven. And I
Hmm.
think his life is incredibly inspiring because his life was actually quite sad and tormented. His brother was essentially exploiting him. He was almost penniless, although he enjoyed a lot of success while in life, but his sort of brother ended up taking most of his sort of money, and he was also very unlucky in love. I mean, he didn't really had the opportunity to live the loves of his life, and so a very gloomy life in also what was a fairly gloomy period. Yet he wrote this exceptional music, culminating in. For example, the Ninth Symphony, but also other symphonies like the Third Symphony, and if you think about it, he was particularly unlucky that he even lost his hearing. He couldn't hear anything in the later part of his life, so he was essentially composing, hearing music in his mind. And all these misfortunes, he was still able to write some of the most optimistic and joy-infused pieces ever. And so to me, it's always a reminder, that, yes, you can go through difficult moments in life, but you can always find beauty and the hope and joy if you find it in yourself, like very much like what he did. He found everything within himself because what surrounded him wasn't that joyful. So that is definitely a huge inspiration for me.
That's awesome. Last question. I'm curious if there's a brand that you've never worked on, but that you really admire, and what is it about that brand that you admire most?
Oh, there are plenty of brands that I really admire, I have to say. I am particularly drawn to those that are courageous enough to really put their ethos forward, even at the cost, for example, of losing sales. And for example, one brand that I really admire is Patagonia. What they've done, for example, with the
Yeah.
marketing, especially in the early days. I think was incredible because they were really prepared, in some cases, even to lose a little bit of market share in exchange for sort of standing for a particular principle. And I think that is one example of where actually what is a good thing to do, the moral thing to do, also happens to be the commercially clever thing to do, because then it
Yeah.
turned out to be very good for them. And so that is definitely a brand that I admire. And in general, I'm drawn towards brands that really have this courage for innovation. And there is another one that's much more sort of niche, the sort of the Nothing phone. I think it's the Nothing company, based out of
Right,
London.
right, right.
Yes, they do like
Explain what this
phones and
is. Yeah, it's a phone that doesn't
they
do all
do
social
like it's an
media.
Android-based smartphone. They also have headphones and earphones. But I think the whole concept behind the Nothing Company is about simplicity and the joy of beautiful objects and design. So it's design heavy. They're very much connected with Central St. Martin's, which is this sort of huge design center university we have in London. And they create these products that are incredibly beautiful to look at with a software that is, in this case, Android, but is really custom tailored to be simple, to remove all friction and really be focused on the user and be useful. There is a lot of AI also that they use behind it to make it useful. And is it the phone I would probably buy for everyday use? Probably not, but
Mhm.
it's still I'm very much drawn to that idea of really trying to be very different, and instead of creating a phone that is the fastest or the lightest or the best camera, they go for beauty. This
Yeah.
relentless pursuit for beauty and craftsmanship.
I think this might be you might have described two brands, one that stands for something powerful, and it turns out that that is commercially really successful. And then the second was one you said, I don't know if I would carry this phone, but I really appreciate them.
Yes,
So
yes,
I don't know how commercially viable they will be in the long term if there are enough people that say it's a cool idea, but I'm not sure that I'm
yes.
actually going to carry the phone. But anyway, Francesco Federico is the Chief Marketing Officer for S&P Global. Francesco, this was such a delightful conversation. Thank you so much for spending the time with me.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me. It was a pleasure.